والصلاة والسلام على أشرف المرسلين. So I'm going to read some information or share some information with you. And our topic today, our lesson today in terms of black history, help us understand what we're dealing with today in terms of social injustice and racial injustice, you know what I'm saying, where it's all coming from, or the history of it. It's important. And as I have been saying, you know, many of us, you know, we don't know our history, all right? And even me, I'm relearning history that I didn't know. And I mentioned the other day, I've learned so much about history in this last month, and perhaps that I knew all my life, you know? But I don't feel bad because, again, certain things are hidden from us. Some things are not in the books, the mainstream books that you learn in school. Like I was listening to one professor, you know, when he said, listen, I graduated from Harvard. You know, so I got a PhD, you know, in law from Yale. And he mentioned all the universities he went through. He said, I ain't never learned no history like I learned in these last few years. And he was teaching the people, basically. And I was able to relate to that, you see. So just in a little over a month or two, you know, I've learned so much. And so I think it's important, again, that that I share this with you, so you'll know and you have a better sense of what we as a people, we as African American people, Muslim and non-Muslim, what we have to deal with, you know what I'm saying, in this society, all right, and what we've had to deal with, all right, so you can better prepare yourself to move forward, all right, to be better. You know, even as a Muslim, okay? So today, inshallah, we're going to talk about Jim Crow. Jim Crow, okay? As I mentioned to you before, last week I talked about reparations, right? The importance of, you know, again, there's a movement been going on for decades, you know, a movement of African American people and other allies, you know, demanding, okay, that the government of America, you know, repair the damage, you know, the pain and suffering that we have went through since, you know, slavery, so forth and so on. That we need to get paid some kind of compensation and whatnot. Just like the Jews were given, you know, by the German government, you know, compensation for the Holocaust. Okay, all right. Yeah. So having said that, again, as a reminder, when we talk about reparations, and I mentioned 3 tiers, so it's not just the slavery, okay? So the first tier is, you know, 3 tiers of injustice that forms the basis of reparations for the African American people, right? 3 tiers, and 3 reasons this whole demand for reparations is based upon. Number 1, the brutal pain and suffering of slavery. All right? And that includes the Atlantic Passage from Africa to the West. Because we learned during that period of the slave trade, millions of our people didn't make it. They didn't make it. Meaning, in other words, they died en route. They were thrown overboard into the sea. Okay? All right? So they didn't make it. So that was very, very horrible. Okay? They lost their lives. So that's the first tier, you know, and everything that we went through during that period from 1619 to 1865, all right? The pain and suffering of slavery, 246 years of pain and suffering and brutalization and dehumanization and torture and so forth. That's the first tier. Everybody got that? Mm-hmm. That's the first tier. That's why we demand some kind of compensation. That's the first tier. The second tier, and that's what we're going to talk about now. All right? The unjust legal Jim Crow laws. And the Jim Crow laws were the laws, you know, that stated that white folks and black folk should be separate and segregated, all right? But they should be equal in terms of what is given to them, all right? So separate but equal. But of course, you know, those laws were not just, okay? And we will mention some of those things, okay? And that took place after slavery. After slavery. From from 1865 until 1965. You know, Civil Rights Act, and Martin Luther King and all of those pioneers and civil rights leaders, you know, who were on the front line making noise, man, about, you know, to get our right. And brothers and sisters, especially you young people, that wasn't too long ago. That wasn't too long ago. So the Jim Crow laws, all right, lasted from 1865 to 1965. That's 100 years. So that was 100 years after slavery, we were still kind of like stuck in slavery. Okay? All right? So that's the second tier. All of the pain and suffering that we went through for 100 years, even after slavery. That's the second tier. And the third tier, I'll just mention it again, just to remind you, the ongoing racial inequalities and systemic racism until now. And the most recent manifestation that we all are clear on and the whole world is all upset about is when they, you know, when the police killed that man, you know, in Minneapolis, you know, George Floyd. Police brutality and the ongoing brutality of black men and black people, you know, about white people, so forth and so on, and the whole issue of police brutality and other areas and manifestation of discrimination of black people, okay? So those are the three tiers. So what is this Jim Crow? What is this Jim Crow thing? Jim Crow was the name of a racial caste system. This is a very important part of our history. You got to pay attention. Jim Crow was the name of the racial caste system which operated primarily but not exclusively in southern and border states between 1877 and the mid-1960s. Jim Crow was more than a series of rigid anti-black laws. It was a way of life. It was a way of life. All right? Under the Jim Crow system, African Americans were relegated to the status of second-class citizens. Second-class citizens. Jim Crow represented the legitimization of anti-black racism. Many Christian ministers and theologians taught back in the day that white folks were the chosen people and that blacks were cursed to be servants. That's what they taught. And God supported racial segregation. That's what they taught, okay? The Jim Crow system was supported by the following beliefs or rationalizations. Whites were superior to blacks in all important ways, including, not limited to, intelligence. That's what they taught. Morality and civilized behavior, sexual relations between blacks and whites would produce a mixed up race. So they didn't allow that. They got to be separate. Whites can be mixing with blacks. Okay. It's crazy when you think about it. Wow. It's hard to even believe. Some of you young people, it's hard to believe that now. It's hard, yeah. But it's not hard to believe. It happened, and it's still, and that systemic racism still goes on, okay? If necessary, violence must be used to keep blacks at the bottom of the racial hierarchy. The following Jim Crow etiquette and norms shows how inclusive and pervasive these norms were. But I'm not going to read all of that. I'm just going to mention just a few things I got highlighted. It's too long. In fact, there's a Jim Crow museum in the South, inshallah, and I'll get that information for you once I know. Okay. Give some examples of Jim Crow. This was the reality here in America, okay? Under the Jim Crow laws, all right, that was enacted by the government. And the civil rights movement struggled to change, okay? Even though we had gained our freedom, okay? Education. The schools for white children and the schools for black children shall be conducted separately. I remember as a little boy when I was in the South. I was born in the South. And the school we went to was all black. We didn't go to school with white people. We didn't go to school with white people. It's unheard of. We didn't ride on the bus with white people. I remember all of that. Because I was born in 1950, so subhanAllah, so that stuff was still going on. I say it goes all up to 1965, that stuff was still going on. Libraries. The state librarian is directed to fit up and maintain a separate place for the use of the black people who may come to the library for the purpose of reading books or periodicals. Mental hospitals. The Board of Control shall see that proper and distinct apartments are arranged for said patients, so that in no case shall blacks and white persons be together. All right? This is in Georgia. The military. White and colored militia shall be separately enrolled and shall never be compelled to serve in the same organization. No organization of colored troops shall be permitted where white troops are available, and where whites are permitted to be organized, colored or black troops shall be under the command of white officers. This is the North Carolina law. Nurses. No person or corporation shall require any white female nurse to nurse in legal recourse against these assaults, because the Jim Crow criminal justice system was all white police, prosecutors, and judges. Violence was instrumental for Jim Crow. It was a method of social control. The most extreme form of Jim Crow violence was lynchings. Lynching. You know, where a mob runs and gets you out of a jail cell or whatever, or get you out of your home or whatever the case may be. All right? If they think you committed some crime, and they'll grab you and they'll take you and string you up on a tree and hang you and burn you, etc., etc. This is what they did. All right? This was like a law. People are allowed to do that. Okay? Lynchings were public, often sadistic. Murders carried out by mobs. Between 1882, when the first reliable data were collected, and in 1968, when lynchings had become rare, there were 4,730 known lynchings, including 3,440 black men and women. Most of the victims of lynch law were hanged or shot, but some were burned at the stake, castrated. I mean, you were castrated, they cut your private parts out, off. Castrated, beaten with clubs, or dismembered in the mid-1800s. Whites constituted the majority of victims and perpetrators. However, by the period of radical reconstruction, blacks became the most frequent lynching victim. This is an early indication that lynching was used as an intimidation to keep blacks down. In this case, the newly freed black in their spaces, to keep them controlled and to keep them from progressing. The great majority of lynchings occurred in southern and border states, where the resentment against blacks ran deepest, according to social economics Gunnar Marduk. The southern states account for 9/10 of the lynchings. More than 2/3 of the remaining 1/10 occurred in 6 states which immediately border the South. Many whites claim that although lynchings were distasteful, they were necessarily supplements to the criminal justice system, because blacks were prone, here's what they said, that blacks were prone to violent crimes, especially the rape of white women. Arthur Rapper investigated nearly a century of lynchings and concluded that approximately 1/3 of all the victims were falsely accused. And to wrap this up, okay, alhamdulillah. Y'all still with me?
Yeah.
Y'all still with me? All right, okay. Under Jim Crow, under Jim Crow law, I'm going to keep that Jim Crow, everybody got that Jim Crow. When you hear that word, And my purpose is so when you hear that word, you know, from leaders or people, you know, or intellectuals or whatever, civil rights people, when they mention in the old Jim Crow law, you right away, it will trigger something in your mind. You know what that is. Okay, wow, Jim Crow. Separate, supposedly separate but equal. And what went with that, with those laws, is again, lynchings, you know, and continued brutalization. So under Jim Crow, any and all sexual interactions between black men and white women was illegal. You couldn't have a white girlfriend. You were black, man. You were in trouble if you got caught like that. So you can't even imagine things like that now. Okay? Illicit, socially repugnant, and within the Jim Crow definition of rape. You would be accused of rape if you had a white girl. See? Although only 19.2% of the lynching victims between 1882 to 1951 were even accused of rape, lynch law was often supported on the popular belief that lynchings were necessary to protect white women from black rapists. That's the kind of stuff they had out there on us, man. Mardo, one of the historical writers on this issue, refutes this belief in this way. There is much reason to believe that this figure, 19.2, has been inflated by the fact that a mob which makes the accusation of rape is secure from any further investigation. By the broad Southern definition of rape to include all sexual relations between Negro men and white women. So they consider that rape, just to have a relationship, okay? And by the psychopathic fears of white women in their contacts with Negro men. Most blacks were lynched for demanding civil rights, violating Jim Crow etiquette or laws, or in the aftermath of race riots. Lynchings were most common in small and mid-sized towns, where blacks often were economic competitors to the local whites. These whites resented any economic and political gains made by blacks. Lynchers were seldomly arrested, and if arrested, rarely convicted. Okay? And so this is some of the history of Jim Crow and the lynching of our people. I want to close out with one particular. In fact, I had initially intended to do one lesson on it. Is that the kind of lynching and mob violence against black people that I think all of us should know about. Okay. And maybe I will hold off on to it next week to continue, inshallah, if the time won't permit, all right? At least half of the lynchings are carried out with police officers participating, and that in 9/10 of the others, the officers either condone or wink at the mob action. Lynching served many purposes. It was cheap entertainment. It served as a rallying, uniting point for whites. It functioned as an ego massage for low-income, low-status whites. It was a method of defending white domination and helped stop or retard the fledgling social equality movement. Lynch mobs directed their hatred against sometimes several victims. The victim was an example of what happened to a black man who tried to vote, or who looked at a white woman, or who tried to get a white man's job. Unfortunately for blacks, sometimes the mob was not satisfied to murder a single or several victims. Instead, in the spirit of pogroms, like they used to, you know, special punishments that they used to persecute people with, the mob went into black communities and destroyed additional lives and property. Their immediate goal was to drive out, through death or exposing, all blacks. The larger goal was to maintain at all costs white supremacy. All right? These persecutions and mob violence are often referred to as riots. However, Gunnar Myrdal was right when he described these riots as a terrorization or massacre, a mass lynching. Interestingly, these mass lynchings were primarily urban phenomena, whereas the lynching of single victims was primarily a rural phenomenon. And as I mentioned before, one of the things that they would do in closing, and you know, these lynchings would be events. Would be events, you know, and they would announce it in editorial. And thousands of people would come out in the countryside.
Right.
You know, yeah, and everybody would come out to witness this. There'd be men and women and kids, and they watch, you know, black people being lynched and burned and dismembered and things of that nature. It's amazing. It's hard to believe. It's hard to believe. It just happened. It did happen. And it wasn't too long ago, you see. So the kind of things that our people go through even now, well, it's just a, you know, just a carryover. It's the impact of all that happened before.
Yeah.
So we have a fight on our hands. Our young people, you have a fight on your hand. The fight has never stopped. We have to continue to fight. You see what I'm saying? You have to continue to struggle and whatnot to assert ourselves, to take our place and exert, you know, our rights as human beings.
Yeah.
Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen. So that is our lesson today, Black history. You know, again, the Jim Crow laws. You know, the whole idea of legal racial discrimination. That's what it was. It was the law. Okay. And so because of the pain, and, you know, due to the pain and suffering of that, you know, again, that's one of the tiers of reparation. This is the harm. So after slavery was over, you know, it continued. We continue to be abused and oppressed, all right, in a very dehumanizing way.
Jim Crow was a real person, like a politician or somebody?
Yeah, that's another issue. You know, I read some stuff on that. It was really like a sarcasm, really. You know, it was a way of defaming and humiliating. It was a term that's supposed to characterize blacks. You know, like the like what they call it, blackface. You know, the people paint themselves black and act silly. You know, it comes from that. Yeah, it comes from that tradition. All right. It's connected with that. But I can get some more specifics about it and whatnot. But like I said, it's real detailed, okay, and whatnot, you know. But the discriminative laws that they enacted, well, it's called Jim Crow. Jim Crow laws. All right? And all you need to know, Jim Crow, yeah, you know, racial discrimination, legal racial discrimination. It was legal. It was written in their laws and whatnot. And they had to follow that. That's why, you know, back then, when you go to a public place, it had signs, colored, whites, Negro, whites, you know, so you couldn't even go to a public place, you know, a park, you know, a public park and drink from a water, you know, share water fountain with people. It would be, this is for the colored and this is for the whites. The bathrooms, for the colored and for the whites. That's how it was, everything. The buses, you know, all of that, everything, all of the public facilities, separate, okay? And that was a way of keeping away from, you know, disallowing, you know, blacks and whites from mixing. All right? So when you think about it, it's like, wow, this is ridiculous, crazy, but those things did happen, and they had a tremendous impact, you know, on us as a people. We went through a lot, man, all right? Or put it this way, your predecessors went through a lot. All right? Those who came before you went through a lot. And I remember as a child, you know, some of this stuff in the South before I was a little boy, you know. I remember the chain gangs, the men with the stripe, you know, prison, and they'd be working in the field with ankle balls on their. I remember that. I remember driving to the countryside with my grandfather and watching, Grandpa, who's that? That's the chain gang, boy. You know what I'm saying? And I remember my, you know, one of my uncles, you know what I'm saying, you know, was convicted for something.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, brothers and sisters. Please send your donations to our website, masjidallahuakbar.org. That's masjidallahuakbar.org. Under the Donate Now portion of our homepage, it will direct you to PayPal, or you can send it through our Cash App. Our Cash tag is $MasjidAllahuakbar. That's $Masjid Allahu Akbar. You can also use our Masjid phone number, which is 631-335-2190. That's 631-335-2190. You can also send it straight to our banking account. That's routing number 221-473-652. Checking account number 997-930-0606. This is for Project Allahu Akbar. If you have any questions on how to send the donations, you can contact me, Shahid Hanif, at 516 area code 743-8752, or the Mass Street phone number again, 631-335-2190. We encourage you to spend fi sabilillah. This is the month of giving. This is the month of Ramadan. Inshallah, we need all the help that we can. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Jazakallah khair.